everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Marissa Fallon, and I am the Director of Advocacy here at Parents Defending Education. We're so excited for our guest today. I have been reading his book, loving his book, and I'm so excited for you to hear a little bit more about it. So today we have with us Ian Pryor. Ian is the Executive Director of Fight for Schools and Senior Advisor at America First Legal. Ian has become one of the most recognizable voices in the parents' revolution that has swept the country, and he is also a proud dad of 2 daughters. Ian is here to tell us all about his amazing new book that's coming out this week titled Parents of the World Unite: How to Save Our Schools from the Left's Radical Agenda. Ian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to dive right in because I have a lot of questions and I'm so excited to hear what you have to say about the book. Many of us have been following right along with you from the last 2 years since you first formed Fight for Schools and first got involved in K-12 advocacy. We've been following your advocacy and your efforts in Loudoun County, and we're so excited to hear about your book. Let us know a little bit about why did you decide to write this book? When did the idea come to you, and how did you decide to go ahead with it?
Well, a couple of things. I think when we were in the midst of the fight in 2021, a lot of parents, just the stories and the stories we were hearing from people, all the different people involved, it seemed like a mini series, to be honest with you. And we were joking around about, we should do a mini series. And we were just kidding. But, towards the end of 2021, after everything that happened in Virginia, I had so many people asking, how were you able to do what you all did in Virginia? And I can't, answer that question all over the country. It'd be far too time consuming, but I thought, well, maybe if I wrote down sort of what we did in hindsight and put it in a book form. And then coincidentally, the publisher reached out to me and said, hey, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I said, well, as fate would have it, I've just written something. And so I really wanted to write it as sort of a twofold kind of document. One, it would chronicle what happened in Loudoun County and how that impacted Virginia and even beyond. But 2, it would really show some of the strategies behind it, some of the lessons learned, and how to guide parents going forward in their own counties, in their own districts, in their own cities and states. And so I structured it as 12 chapters, and each chapter has a rule that really applies to that particular point in the timeline and in the story.
Great. I want to get into that in a minute, but first I want to ask, who's really the target audience for this book? When you were writing it, did you have a certain demographic in mind? Was it just parents in general? Who were you really writing it for?
Yeah, I think it's parents that, want to step forward, want to be effective, and want to be creative in how they are effective in order to maximize, what they're able to do. And going beyond just bring attention to something at a school board meeting or writing a letter to the editor, but really, a sophisticated campaign that has at least an end goal in mind, where there's several byproducts that could come from that, but really unifying a team of people in a specific area and trying to achieve a common objective and goal.
So as you know, I've read the book. I absolutely loved it. I could not put it down. I meant to read it maybe over a couple days. I honestly, full confession, I read it all in one night. So it was a very easy read. It was so fantastic. I love the format that you chose with those 12 rules. And they really are like 12 steps that people can follow. Maybe someone gravitates a little bit more toward one step than the other. Can you give us a couple of rules from the book, and also let us know, how did you come up with that idea to organize the book that way?
Well, a couple of ways. First of all, I'm a big fan of strategy. Whether it's Sun Tzu or Machiavelli, sort of the classic strategy books. But there's also an author out there by the name of Robert Greene, who, I've read a bunch of his books, 48 Laws of Power, 33 Laws of War. And what they do is it's very similar to what I did, but it takes different stories throughout history. And I had been, really digging into some of those during this time. But also, thinking about history and thinking about, how historical events have happened and what you can learn from them, as well as, and I think people that read the book will see, I'm a big sports fan, and, sports is a microcosm of life. And you see strategies when you're watching sports, when you're following teams and really sort of taking all those different ideas, really putting it into a book format in the context of what we did in Virginia.
And can you tell us a little bit about some of your rules, maybe touch on a few?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think it's the third chapter, which is flip the script. That's really kind of one of the big inflection points that happened in Loudoun County and certainly Virginia. And that's when you had this private Facebook group, the Anti-Racist Parents of Loudoun County. You had 6 school board members in it. You had one school board member, really a call to push back on sort of the opposition to the equity work that they were doing in schools, equity. And the activists in there just took it to a whole new level. And they talked about how, well, what we're going to do with these people that come to school board meetings, we're going to infiltrate their groups. We're going to publicly expose them. We're going to hack their websites and redirect them to pro-critical race theory websites. And that got out, and it got out to people, and ultimately we flipped the script. We actually found what they were doing, and we publicly exposed it, and really created a national firestorm over it because it's an important issue. I love how the left out there will say, well, they made a big deal out of this. Like, yeah, it is a big deal. It is a big deal when you have members of the community trying to cancel other members of the community because they disagree with them, especially on school issues. These are policies that affect people's children. You should be able to go out there and debate those policies, the substance of those policies, without having to worry about, a bunch of angry activists saying, we're going to cancel that person because they're evil or they're wrong or they're bad. Like, no, have the debate. But if you're going to come out there and say, well, we're going to try and ruin these people, we're going to flip the script, and, we don't want to ruin anybody, but we at least want to expose what is happening. And that was really sort of the first domino to fall over the course of 2021, which really exposed Loudoun County Public Schools to the point where, much of what we were talking about was ultimately confirmed by a special grand jury report. So we certainly did flip the script. We exposed them. We watched what they were doing, and we made sure to hold everybody accountable.
I love that. And I really think one of the things that you did too that really fits into that category was the name of Chardonnay Antifa was just genius, because it was, this can be a very, your emotions are heightened. It can be very dramatic when you're getting involved and all of these things about what's going in school. Everyone's very emotional. So I love kind of that element of humor. I mean, people know what you're getting at with a name like that. People know what you're getting at, but it was bringing in the humor that I think made it just people understood what was happening. So while the book is strategic, it's also really funny. So I laughed so hard when I was reading it, and I recommend everybody look into what I'm talking about when I talk about a Halloween party that included Jesus, a koala bear, and a tiger. And did you try to make it funny, or was it just that what was happening was around you was just so ridiculous there was really no other way to handle it other than with humor? Because I think that's a fantastic aspect of the book.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. You look around at some of the things, and certainly I document them in the book. I mean, it's just so absurd. People take themselves so seriously, and they always have the right answer, and they just really make themselves look like buffoons. And Chardonnay Antifa, it's just sort of a light brushback on what they're doing. And I think that's one of the best ways to do it. I mean, people do get very angry about these things. They have a right to be angry about them, but you can't fight this fight if you're constantly angry. I mean, you have to have a sense of humor, or else you'll go crazy. And that's probably why the other side has been flailing for so long now, is because they don't have a sense of humor. They take themselves so seriously. They think everything is a matter of life or death, and everything is black and white, and there's no nuance. Where, I think if you add a little bit of humor, a little bit of levity, while still focusing on the seriousness of things, people are more likely to listen to you and to, that's a normal person. Okay, I may not agree with everything that he says or she says, but at least they don't take everything so seriously and trying to ram it down our throats. That is just a natural repellent to having a productive conversation.
Let me ask you about one thing that our parents are always concerned about when they're starting to get into advocacy. And you did such a great job with it through Fight for Schools. We're always telling our parents that everyone can do something in this fight. Some people might be, keep behind the keyboard. They might be able to set up a website for a group. Some people might be great public speakers and they can write speeches, or they can help their community members write speeches to talk to school board members. They can write a letter to the editor. They can write an op-ed. They can gather people together. So everyone can do something, but some parents feel like they don't really have what it takes to engage. You obviously had a great skill set when you formed Fight for Schools, and you touch on this in the book. And I love it when you write in rule number 3, always flip the script, that quote, "I just happened to be someone who knew exactly what to do and I wasn't afraid to do it." Can you tell us a little bit about how your past experiences helped you become a successful parent advocate? I think that would provide a really great roadmap for parents, and also to help them realize, to look inside themselves, that everybody has something that they can bring.
Well, yeah, I mean, I started out the first 10 years of my professional life as a lawyer. So that was really the foundation of my experience. And then I moved into the political realm, but I was never really super ideological. I worked jobs like the National Republican Congressional Committee or Senate Leadership Fund or the Department of Justice, but I always handled it like I was a lawyer. And so, whether you're communicating about a candidate or about an issue, to really try and think about convincing the audience, whether you're convincing a jury or you're convincing an audience, you have to see things through their lens so you're able to create an effective argument. And so that's how I've always conducted myself. But during that time, certainly, you learn, hey, there's always going to be some legal angle to look at to see if, hey, this school board, violated this FOIA law, or this school board violated, that law. And then, of course, there's the being able to reach out to the media, which a lot of people say, well, I've never been in front of the media before. And that's fine. We've had lots of people that were like that. But once you reach out and you start working with reporters, it was amazing to me is that I was able to kind of open the door. And then, reporters would start reaching out to individual parents without reaching out to me. And I was like, this is great. I don't have to be the go-between. And I think a lot of people learned that, they can do this too. They don't need somebody that's actually been doing this for years. They can pick up the phone and call a reporter if they see something that, might be a story. They can give a quote. It really sort of gelled, and we had lots of people with different skill sets. Some people were really good at digging in and investigating and sending Freedom of Information Act requests. Some people were also lawyers and they were looking into issues. Some people were very good on television. Some people were really good at organizing a message for a school board. Other people were really good at getting others to events and really driving people there. So it was really just a full team effort that we saw in Virginia.
So kind of carrying on that idea of opening the door and starting to get a foothold and figuring out what was actually going on in your district. Can you just talk a little bit about the really important way that you found out about the Equity Collaborative? Because you mentioned in the book that was really the equity origin story of how things came to be in Loudoun County. So we try to get our parents to do research and learn about what's going on in their districts. And you used a great tool to get a hold of that contract. So can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was, I think, July of 2020. I had seen a story in the Washington Free Beacon about how Loudoun County Public Schools was using teaching tolerance as a resource. So that's Southern Poverty Law Center. I thought to myself, all right, well, what's going on with that? Looked into it, very woke, emailed the principal, said, hey, are you guys using this? No, we're not using it. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to tune into this school board meeting. So I tuned into the school board meeting. It was all virtual at the time because of COVID. And, they were talking about their equity plan and their detailed plan to dismantle systemic racism in Loudoun County Public School. And I'm like, well, this systemic racism, Loudoun County Public Schools? All right, well, how? And that brought me to this Equity Collaborative report that had been done the year before. And, I read the report and, it was just all conclusory. It was based on, anonymous interviews. There was no verification of any of the things they were writing about. They excluded Asian and Caucasian parents from the focus group. It really looked like a report that was designed to come to a conclusion and then came to that conclusion. So I sent my first FOIA request, and I had never sent a Freedom of Information Act request before, but it's pretty easy. I just created an account on the system. And, you really need to structure the terms and the search as clearly as possible so that, you get what you want. And I simply asked for the contract with the Equity Collaborative from, January, I think, of 2019 to present, and any bills paid and invoices paid to the Equity Collaborative. And lo and behold, I got the contract and I got the invoices paid just for 2019, and it was $422,000. And I thought, that's a lot of money.
Wow.
That is a lot to pay somebody to come in and do this. So, I wrote that up. I wrote a story in the Federalist, and then, tips started to come in. Once I wrote that first story, I started getting other tips of things. I started really learning about, hey, this is actually a little bit deeper than just this one report and just this one, this one consultant. This is something that's really creeping into LCPS.
Well, the thing that I think is so interesting about that is we see how much success you've had. We see the massive, significant impact that you've had. But it was interesting to hear that there was a time when you were, like a lot of parents out there, what is a FOIA? How do I do a FOIA? So you've learned so much. I mean, we see all the successes now, and you had a great skill set coming into this advocacy work, but you also learned as you went along.
Yeah. And, it's funny because, my adversaries out here always like to say, well, he didn't vote in the 2019 election. Like, yeah, no kidding. That's the point, right? I was just like everybody else. I'd vote in midterms. I'd vote, in presidential years, but I didn't really pay that much attention to what was going on in the school board. I just assumed, I'm sure they're all great people that go and manage the budget and everything's fine. And you send your kid to school and everything's great. Just like the majority of people out there, I was trusting of the school system, and a neighbor of mine said, oh, you really got to go to this meeting. They're talking about these books. I'm like, yeah, not really that interested. But it wasn't once I started digging in. And I think I've seen this from a lot of parents that I talk to. Once they start peeling back the layers of the onion, then they just can't stop because it keeps going and going and going. And you find that, this has been going on at schools for years, for decades, and it's been a slow burn, but really over the past 10 years, it's been put on steroids. And I think after COVID, when everything started getting done online, that's when parents really got a window into what was happening.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think parents watching the instruction that was happening on their children's computers, peeking over their shoulders, we all sent our kids to school, and we didn't really press. We didn't ask a lot of questions. We didn't, other than the occasional parent, we didn't really dig into the curriculum because we did think that at that point, kind of the teachers and the administrators did know best. So I think this has really been a learning process for parents and grandparents, community members, and people who really care about K through 12 schools to pull back the blinders and really see what's going on in our schools. So it's been an amazing trajectory to watch how much that has changed over the last 2 years. One thing I wanted to mention about in your book is I love your shout out to the Army of Moms. Your description of your 4th of July float in your rule number 8, do not stop at the wall chapter, was so great. It was such a great visual, and it was such a great description of parents and community members coming together over a common goal. And as we know, building a strong team of supporters and like-minded parents is absolutely key, I think, to staying motivated and to staying inspired and continuing to do our advocacy for our kids. So can you talk a little bit about how important these great moms were to you and how they kept you motivated? I know that you also had an amazing brigade that went out and collect signatures. And I think, having the humor and having the relationships with your other community members, some of whom you probably knew and some of whom probably became fast friends of yours over the following 2 years. So can you just talk a little bit about how important that kind of coalition building really was to keeping you going?
Yeah, that's what made it go. That was the engine. These mothers that not all of them were very political, to be honest with you. They weren't necessarily members of the Republican Party, or they're just going to put on their team colors and vote. But they were really ticked about what was going on in schools and with the school board, and they were very resourceful. They were dedicated. They'd go out in the rain, sleet, hail to get signatures. They'd do pop-up events to get signatures. They'd show up at school board meetings. They'd do research. They'd send Freedom of Information Act requests. They'd send me tips that I hadn't seen before. For example, an interesting story is that our superintendent on a school board meeting lied to the public when he said there had been no sexual assaults in bathrooms. But nobody noticed that. Nobody noticed that at the time. They had closed off the meeting. People had gone home. They didn't let everybody back in, and it just fell on deaf ears. And it wasn't until everybody started to realize that a second incident had happened with the same kid that one of these moms flagged that video for me, and I said, "Oh my, wow! I didn't even realize that happened." And that became really the key piece of everything that followed. So we had a lot of things like that where, different moms were FOIAing different things and, sending them around. And it was like, oh, that's good. We can use that. Oh, that's interesting. Didn't see that. And it's really been going on for, 2 years now. And it's been extremely valuable, beyond the 25,000 signatures they collected, to really, getting transparency and holding our school system accountable.
Yeah, and we really know, right? I mean, who is going to fight for our kids more than our parents, our moms and our dads, right? So it's great that you were able to all come together and that you all found each other and you were able to do such amazing things, not only in Loudoun County, but of course, you all have inspired people all across the country in seeing your successes. And I am a visual person, so I love to create visual images for people so they can really kind of get in their head certain events or certain historic things that happen. I love how in rule number 10, if they're on the ropes, go for the knockout, which, just an aside, I love your chapter titles. Your rule titles are just so great. You wrote about an incredible event, and that was the final rally for gubernatorial candidate Glenn Youngkin the night before his election. And it was on the Loudoun County Fairgrounds in Leesburg, Virginia. And I remember that night, it was cold. It was a cold night. And I remember watching the coverage of that rally on TV, and it was just an unbelievable stream of cars. And I know that I knew a lot of the parents that were in those cars, and a lot of those parents, just like you, had been fighting so hard and advocating for their kids for so long. And this was where everybody really came together, and it was really culminating. I remember seeing the pictures on TV about all the parents, the grandparents, the community members, the little kids, the older kids, all attending that rally and waiting for you to speak and waiting for the candidate to speak. It was really overwhelming. And you gave an absolutely fantastic speech, and it was so inspiring. And you introduced Glenn Youngkin to the crowd. And I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that night and how did it feel to be standing on that stage and to walk out onto that stage? And then, you had kind of been in the crowd for so long and motivating everyone and inspiring everyone. And now you're on the stage looking out at, all of these people that you had worked so hard with. So it must have been amazing. So can you just tell us a little bit about how that felt?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. We certainly had rallies before, and there'd been hundreds of people at our rallies, but nothing like that. I mean, first of all, the Youngkin team did fantastic events, and the production was amazing. But to see all these people that that either signed our petitions, or they were circulating petitions, or they were showing up at school board meetings, or I didn't even know them at all, but it was this feeling of inevitability. When I walked out on that stage, I just knew we were gonna win, right? Glenn Youngkin was gonna win. Winsome Sears was gonna win. Jason Miyares was gonna win. I had no doubt in my mind. And 2 weeks earlier, I might not have said that. But as we did that, I just felt the energy from the crowd, and it was so fun to be able to kind of give a shout out to what they had all done. And I talked about how they'd been an inspiration to millions of parents across the country. And by that point in time, it was absolutely true. I mean, parents had been fighting in places for a lot longer, but because of the spotlight that was on Virginia and because of the success that we were having, it really it was like a thunderclap across the country. And now I go around and people say, "Oh, Loudoun County, you guys have inspired us," or "Oh, we're Loudoun County 2.0. What do we do?" I mean, it is. In some ways, it's sad because of the state of the school leadership has made that county school district notorious. But on the other hand, the work of the parents fighting for their kids has had the opposite effect and has been inspirational across the country. And so that's one of the things I hope that this book can accomplish is, really touting their efforts and their impact and inspiring others to keep fighting, even when it looks tough.
Well, I know you got a raucous round of applause when you gave that speech. And for all of our viewers, that speech is printed in the book. So when you get the book, you can read the whole speech and you can read the amazing, last, directive or motivational shout out that Ian gave to everybody that was in the crowd. So if you had one piece of advice or you wanted to let parents know, have one main takeaway from reading Parents of the World Unite, what would that be?
I think it's very simple. It's very easy. And it's, look, a lot of people do it to look at what's happening and say, I don't want to get involved. It's going to cost me friendships. It's going to cost me, it could cost me employment opportunities. It could cost you a lot. But at the end of the day, as all of this stuff is happening in our schools, in our country, in our world, where, people are being intolerant towards other viewpoints, they'll talk about their inclusivity and their diversity, but in reality, what they want is uniformity of viewpoint. And that's going to chip away at what we are as a country. And it's really going to destroy the marketplace of ideas, which is what progress is really generated from. And you can sit by and you can let that happen. Or you can get in the fight and you can put on, your suit of armor, take the slings and arrows, and really know that you stood up, not just for your children's present, but also their future. Because what are they going to inherit, 20 years from now, 30 years from now? What kind of country are they going to live in? Are they going to live in one where if you don't hold the right idea, then, you are not going to function in society? Are they going to hold, a position in society where people are respectful of other viewpoints and can have those discussions and work together towards actual solutions and policies that work for an entire constituency, not just a small, class of activists? So I think it's important that everybody looks and says, well, what can I do? It may not be, being front and center, being on television. It may not be sending Freedom of Information Act requests or going to school board meetings, but there's certainly something that you can do to make sure that, you're holding your schools accountable. You pay your tax dollars, you send your children, through those two doors every morning. They are accountable to you, not the other way around. And so it's important that everybody step up and make sure that, the school systems, the bureaucrats in the school systems are working for you to make sure that your children get the best education, get a math education, science, history, English, technology, etc. And then you can handle the other things at home.
Yeah, that's such great advice. Ian, where can people pick up Parents of the World Unite, and how can they follow you, and how can they see your schedule of upcoming events?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Ian D. Pryor. As far as the book, it's available right at the Center Street website, but you can get it at Books A Million, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, any retailer online or in the store.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. We're so happy that you were able to speak with us and to speak to our members and our parents and our community. I really cannot recommend this book enough. You are going to enjoy this book so much. It's a great read. It will make you laugh. It'll make you cry. It'll frustrate you a little bit. It'll inspire you. It'll motivate you. I mean, it really does have all those components. I loved reading it, and it is easy to get discouraged when we see what's happening in our schools and what's happening with education. But this book is really going to inspire you to keep fighting for your children. And I think more importantly, it's going to teach you how to be as effective as you can be in your advocacy. And I think another thing that's really important that's just weaved completely through the book and that Ian touched on today is that you're not alone. So when you're out there doing your advocacy, build your coalitions, build your team, build your group of parents. So you're not the only one out there doing this advocacy. And when you read through this book, you're just going to be reminded of that on every single page. As always, please be aware of what your children are being exposed to and ask questions of your school. If you find something concerning at your school, please reach out to us at defendinged.org or on social media. Please share this video with your friends and tag us. We'll see you next time. And thank you so much, Ian, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.